Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Mike Milken's office, Ronnie Weisbrod.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Robert F. Smith. He's the founder, chairman, and CEO of the global investment firm Vista Equity Partners. Vista's portfolio has close to 50 different software companies with more than 50,000 employees worldwide and more than $31 billion in assets under management. Taken together, this portfolio represents the fourth largest enterprise software company in the world. His experience at the intersection of the most cutting-edge technology, innovation, and finance has given him a remarkable perspective into future trends, opportunities, and risks. Robert is also one of the world's leading philanthropists and was recently featured on the cover of Forbes for his work. He is the only African American to sign the Giving Pledge and is also the chairman of Carnegie Hall. Please welcome Robert Smith.
Thanks, Ronnie. Excited to be here amongst all my wonderful friends and colleagues and people who I've known for quite some time and had a chance to do business with and enjoy a bit of life with. We were clearly short on chairs, so we'll have to talk to Mike about that, but I'm excited nonetheless to lead this wonderful panel. You know, Milken has this unique opportunity to bring together great business minds, business leaders to help solve some of the world's most challenging problems. And quite frankly, I'm excited to share the stage with five brilliant thinkers to talk about a really interesting set of issues that we are facing in this world of transition. And how do we navigate this world of transition with so many dynamics in place? Let me start first just to give a little context for today's discussion. And in many ways, 2017 and 2018 have been exceptional years for those of us in business and for many of us gathered here today. For the first time in a long time, we were experiencing global synchronous growth, leading to an abundance of capital. And whatever your political beliefs are, the tax reform in the United States has led to, frankly, a number of companies flush with cash and looking for their opportunity to use their balance sheets to affect significant changes in their marketplaces, as exhibited by some of the two big mergers in telecom and energy announced today. And we've only begun to scratch the surface of the capabilities of this ubiquitous computing fabric as cloud architecture coupled with blanket connectivity fueled by this Internet of Everything threatens to unleash all of our creative potential. This fabric will be fully catalyzed by our most potent tools of fully enabled artificial intelligence and machine learning systems and eventually quantum computing. These powerful new tools set the stage for new opportunities for efficiency and productivity innovation. And in the most recent CEO Economic Outlook survey by the Business Roundtable, it measured the highest level of optimism in the last 15 years amongst business leaders. And this is a survey, for those of you who don't know, that's a composite of sales projections, capital expending, and hiring plans for the next 6 months. So more than 2/3 of the US CEOs who were surveyed expected their companies to increase capital spending in the next 6 months. So by any measure, we're all feeling pretty good about where we're going as an economy. That said, the interesting thing is when you zoom out just a little bit and start looking beyond next year, in the next 3 to 5 years, CEOs are frankly less optimistic. There are a number of explanations for this. You know, the geopolitical uncertainty is clearly one of them. But in my view, the longer, more permanent dynamic at play here is a growing wariness in the world. The economy and the business climate is changing so much faster. And it's hard for CEOs and executives to think about not only keeping up, but how do you stay ahead of these dynamic changes? It's pretty reasonable to project a strategy for the next 12 months. But frankly, when we start talking 3 to 5 years, it starts getting really murky really fast. You know, CEOs are expected not only to understand technologies that didn't exist 1 or 2 years ago, but to make strategic decisions as to which investments to make. And the fact is, due to the pace of these changes, there are staggering consequences if you get it wrong. We know we're living in an age of disruption, and we're only at the beginning of this latest cycle. And the CEOs I talk to have never been more excited and never been more paranoid all at the same time. And then on top of this, there's this ever-present danger of cyber attack, an angry customer who posts a video on some social media platform with a head of state with an itchy Twitter finger. All created a level of uncertainty that we're all adapting to in real time. So as CEOs look within their organizations and the skills, requirements, and the culture that are demanded by this age of digitization that create, frankly, opportunities for some and upheaval and dislocation for others, we have to understand and think about what is it that we as executives have to do to lead our organizations through this change, just like every other executive has done in the last industrial revolutions before. And now that I've sufficiently terrified you, let me introduce our distinguished panelists who are going to help, frankly, give you a position and help you think about the world and this dynamic change and hopefully renew your sense of optimism. The first to my left is a good friend, David Solomon, who's president and COO of Goldman Sachs and a renowned DJ. So he understands how to keep the youth culture in his organization. David brings to this conversation an expertise not only in how one of the world's largest financial institutions views the economy, but also how a well-honed perspective is important in embracing technology to transform an organization so that it does not get disrupted. To his left is Clara Hughes Johnson, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Stripe and one of the architects and builders of the financial infrastructure of the internet. More than 60% of Americans have made purchases on Stripe's payment platform in the last year. Prior to that, Claire was formerly led a number of product and operations teams at Google, including the company's self-driving car project. To her left is my friend Mark Weinberger, who's the global chairman and CEO of E&Y, which means he leads an operation of roughly 250,000 people that operates in over 150 countries. And as chair of the Business Roundtable's Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee, we should all give him a hand for actually brokering this latest tax initiative on the Hill. And I think you're going to have to head to China next to finish out this trade issue. But let's keep your negotiating skills sharp. Previously, he served as the Assistant Secretary of Treasury for the tax policy for George W. Bush administration, and he was appointed by President Clinton to serve on the Social Security Advisory Board. And he will provide some unique insights into the evolving relationship and responsibilities between public and private sectors. John Thompson, to his left, is the chairman of Microsoft board and was previously the CEO of Virtual Instruments and Symantec. And I find John's perspective particularly interesting and insightful, given that Microsoft has gone through and has to continue to go through an innovative cycle every single day. And John, we will look forward to hearing some of your comments about how Microsoft does it, and frankly, how some of the companies you've stewarded are approaching these issues. And lastly, Devin Wenig, who's the president and CEO of eBay, another titan of the tech sector. eBay has grown substantially under Devin's leadership, and there's no other company I can point to that has had the great success of using technology to enable the individual to participate in the global economy. So I want to welcome these 5 panelists to our stage. So we're going to first start with staying relevant in an age of innovation. And as I talked about with Devin, I think one of the most important dynamics is how do you embrace technology to create opportunity on the one hand. And Devin, you most famously wrote once, in an era where technology can be miscast as dehumanizing and disruptive, we represent a philosophy, being eBay, where technology can lift people and create opportunity at all levels. Please talk a little bit, Devin, about how you do that at eBay and how you talk about continuing an innovative cycle, in particular using artificial intelligence.
Thanks. Well, I mean, first of all, I guess it's worth talking a little bit about how we look at a world in transition. I think the biggest determinant to companies either getting disrupted or disrupting is their adoption and understanding of technology. There are companies that are amazing at customers or marketing or brand or products, but if you don't understand the big shifts that are happening right now in the technology ecosystem, you're not going to survive. And you can go back in time and look at sectors like retail, where we participate in, that had incredibly strong positions that you would have said only 10, 15 years ago will never be upended, that are now in a free fall because they were late in adopting technology. So our philosophy is that you've got to be early, you can't be late, and you've got to experiment, particularly around the big platform shifts that are underway right now. The internet was a platform shift, mobile was a platform shift, and we're on the cusp right now of a couple of the biggest that we've seen in a generation, including artificial intelligence, which you mentioned. How exactly AI is going to manifest in vertical industries remains to be seen, but if you're not adopting an AI or machine learning strategy, regardless of whether you're in financial services or consulting or an internet company, you're going to be in trouble. And it's incredibly important that you're early and that you experiment. And that's been our philosophy in our 21-year history. So we make bets, we make investments, not fully knowing how they're going to play out. And our job is to make these big platform shifts like AI work on behalf of our customers and our community, which is 170 million people that use our platform around the world.
Devin, I want to come back in a minute to talk about how you are actually making those big bets organizationally. How do you manifest it in your companies? We'll come back to that in a second. I want to talk to David Solomon for a second. David, talk a little bit about, you have been the steward and the head of a fantastic financial institution that is going through a major set of changes in the competitive landscape. Years ago you had a well-defined set of competitors. Today you have an undefined set of startups who are becoming competitors. Talk about what you're doing at Goldman to lead the organization in a way that is not only cognizant of what's current, but what's coming.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. And like all businesses, Goldman Sachs sits in an industry that's being affected by technology. It is being disrupted and is changing very quickly. The balance for any business in thinking about these things is to hold on to your legacy businesses, while that change is coming, but make sure that you create an environment that's conducive to innovating, entrepreneurial kind of change and building businesses, around those shifts. I think the changes that have gone on in our business have gone on over a long period of time. It's not something that's just recent, but it's compounding and it goes faster. You look at the equity trading business, for example, you go back 15, 20 years, we would have had at Goldman Sachs, we would have had 500 people making markets and stocks, prices and stocks, every single day. Today, we have 3. It's all done off technology platforms, but those businesses continue to change. And so, the secret is, how do you navigate the arc of going from a business that's analog onto a technology platform, or as businesses have now been on technology platforms for a long time, how do you adapt to changes that your clients and customers need in the interface or the products and services that they require? It requires a lot of investment and it requires balance. And we don't always get it right, but we're very focused on trying to be nimble, trying to be entrepreneurial, trying to be flexible, making sure we have that expertise to both serve our clients, but see around corners and see where it's going. So one of the things we ask a lot is, all right, we see where it is now. Where's it going to be in 5 years? Where's it going to be in 7 years? And are we making the appropriate investments and the appropriate shifts, to serve our client base over that period of time?
I want to get a little more granular. When you say we have to understand the narrative and how this arc is going of change, talk about in a management committee, what are you doing differently? How is it different now than it was 5 years ago or 8 years ago?
Well, you have the mix of people you have in an organization like ours, changes significantly. One of the things that's very different for us is that we have 9,000 engineers inside Goldman Sachs. We employ 37,000 people around the globe. We have 9,000 engineers. If you go back 15 years ago, we didn't have anywhere close to 9,000 engineers. And if you actually look at the headcount of the organization really hasn't grown, but the mix of people has shifted. Lots of engineers. By the way, regulatory shift in our industry, lots of people to deal with regulatory requirements, but lots of things that required people are now done off platforms. You still need very, very good people to put this all together. But we think about technology. We talk a lot about how technology allows us to connect better with our clients, how technology empowers our people, how technology can differentiate us, and we're big believers in the fact that great human capital married with world-class technology connected to your clients, your customers, whatever it is that you're serving, is still a very, very effective model.
I understand about 18 years ago you let one brilliant chemical engineer leave your employee, but we'll talk about how you retain people going forward.
He was a brilliant chemical engineer. We wish he was still in our employ, but we're excited for his success.
Well, I appreciate all that you say. Claire, let's talk a bit about you. 10 years at Google, and I mean, one of the centers of innovation as it relates to this new economy, this fourth industrial revolution. They've been the pioneers. You left this large organization and said, let me go start out on something new and something different. Talk about why you made that decision, point number one, and why you're so excited about what you're doing at Stripe.
Yeah, when I joined Google, it wasn't so large. But when I left, you're right, it was almost 60,000 people, which was a pretty exciting 10 years to be a part of. At Google, the fundamental innovation was sort of figured out fairly early on, and then the monetization for that product. And a lot of what I worked on were the next sort of horizons of growth and cash flow. And I think the key with that kind of a project is knowing when to leave it alone and knowing when to bring it into the core work you do. The reason that I left and the reason that Stripe is exciting to me is something that I think we may end up talking about, which is, there's a lot of capital out there, but there's not a lot of developers. There's what I think of as the developer divide. And the talent that you need to really build for the future is not readily available. And I think it's a huge issue. I think it's something Devin's company thinks about, we think a lot about. And what Stripe is doing is really developer tools and infrastructure. And I think what companies of all sizes have to get used to is sort of using APIs, application programming interfaces, to leverage developer expertise outside of their core business.
Right.
And we're seeing, everyone from Salesforce and Facebook working with us to Lyft or Kickstarter or even really very small companies that are finally taking advantage of internet platforms. I think we need more of that if we're going to actually realize the opportunity that you're talking
so I think we'll talk a little bit later about platforms and ecosystems
Yeah.
as the new paradigm of business. John, let's flip to you and talk about how Microsoft is in, quote unquote, a constant stage of innovation and what you believe is important and required to ensure that these incumbents remain relevant, not only from a hiring perspective, but frankly from leading the technology and the ecosystems going forward.
Well, I don't think anyone would have anticipated in 2014 that Microsoft would be where it is today. Forget about stock price. More importantly, in my mind, is the perception that the market has of the company and its ability to deliver innovation in a very meaningful way. That would not be the case were it not for a very humble but very technically grounded leader in Satya Nadella. Now, that being said, one of the big issues that our industry faces that I think we all have to come to terms with is all about privacy. And this industry is going to be severely impacted if we're not more thoughtful about how we deal with the privacy issues as we move forward. I mean, every one of us, when we took our first link on the web, fell in love. And every one of us now spends significantly more time on the web than ever before. And more is being gathered about us to be used in both a positive and not so positive way. And so I think one of the most significant issues that we're going to have to contend with as an economy in transition, forget about Microsoft, the whole economy, is how do we deal with the privacy issue and how do we make sure that it's not about you and me necessarily or nation states taking advantage of the positions that they have. More and more today, attacks on you and I come from nation states, not from individuals. And therefore, dealing with this problem will become even more acute as time goes on, unless we can come to terms as nations that we have to think and behave differently. Not unlike we had a Geneva Convention many, many years ago. There's a notion that maybe it's time for a digital Geneva Convention to start to think about how companies and industries and countries have to interoperate in a world where data is ubiquitous, but privacy is critical and important to every individual on the planet.
Great. And I want to get back to this whole idea of privacy in a minute, but let's hit Mark. Mark, you run a vast organization, 250,000 people globally, 150 countries. You get a perspective on what's occurring on this planet. I think it'd be worthwhile in sharing in terms of where you see the best organizational design capacity, thinking about innovation, thinking about talent development, and frankly, give the audience some ideas as to what we should be looking out for in terms of how innovation is being effective in large business environments.
Sure, Robert, thank you. And I think David and Devin started off absolutely right. I mean, most importantly, there's something going on every day that we could read about in the newspaper that's going to take a CEO's attention away from what they're doing in all likelihood. But you have to separate the signal from the noise. And the best leaders around the world do that. They figure out where things are going. We know there's demographic shifts going on from north to south and west to east. We know that healthcare is going to be an incredibly burgeoning as we get older need. We know that technology is going to change the way we interact, and digital is going to give us the opportunity to be more real time in how we analyze things. These longer term things clearly are what the best and what I see from around the world CEOs focus on. Devin, you had it right. Actually, the Fortune 500 in the 1960s, when it was first created, is only 10% of the companies left. The average life of a S&P 500 company today is 20 years, dropping to 12 over the next 10 years. This dynamism is taking over. But what you have to do is focus on those long-term issues. And when you do, there's three things that come to the top for us. I mean, we're a people organization. As you said, we have 250,000 people. We do have 1,700 robots, so we are getting into technology and marrying up human and technology. But it is talent still. Everyone is focused on talent, and it has to be diverse talent from those emerging markets. 10 years ago, 47 of the largest companies in the world in the Fortune 500 were from emerging market. Now it's 157. Over the next 10 years, over half will be from that part of the world. 90% of everyone alive under the age of 30 lives in an emerging market. You can't ignore that if you're a business person. So you got to get talent that mirrors your client base. You're going to have to team up better than anywhere else in the world that's using technology, it's using core centers, it's alliance partners. Microsoft and I have a terrific alliance. We have 22 of them, an ecosystem where you're not just focusing on your own business, but you're marrying up with other businesses is key. And then technology, of course. We have 250,000 people. People think we have tax people, we have audit people, we have consultants and M&A experts, but now we have 21,000 data experts and scientists, and we hired 2,000 alone last year. So I think getting those right people in the door and develop them is the future.
Let's talk. I want to do a little bit of a survey here, if I can, impromptu. Let's talk about the ecosystems of man and machine. So, Mark, if you want to start, talk about how you're using these robots in situ. What are they doing? What's the efficacy of them? Then, Devin, I want you to talk a little bit about what you're doing in AI at Microsoft, and we can come back this way in the panel.
So great. So there's all different kind of robots, of course. They're basically algorithms. They're not the Will Robinson robots that we might remember. But some of us might remember. Yeah. And it's, everyone talks about the loss of jobs, and there will be clearly a displacement. But in our view, what we're seeing is tasks are going away, not jobs. So the factory workers are, used to be physical, moving goods around. Now they're operating robots. For us, our 1,700 bots are doing contract analysis. They're doing billing analysis. They're helping us upload and move data around the world. And we're doing it with 60, 70% more efficiency overnight and at third the cost. And the quality goes way up. So I think it's really figuring out how people work with machines, not machine or people.
Right. Devin, talk quickly about how you're utilizing AI and ML in your business. And then, David, I want to hear you, and then John.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a stunning couple of years for the breakthroughs that we're now seeing in computing power and AI. There are a couple of areas that we're focused on. The way human beings interface with computers is dramatically changing right before our eyes. I think the paradigm of you type text into a box is going away very, very quickly. Right now we're seeing tremendous breakthroughs in the ability of computers to recognize images, the ability of speech to be an interface to computers, and then the computing power that is driving personalization went through a decade of, frankly, tepid results and is now seeing incredible success. So for us, we tend to allow a lot of experiments, and then one starts to work, we scale it, and we bring it, and we feed it, and we bring it more centrally. I think the next 10 years, AI is going to be the most significant computing factor in every single industry in the economy.
How much organizational flexibility do you have from your board to actually fund some of those initiatives?
We have to. To me, it's an imperative. If you are late to these fundamental platform shifts, no matter what else you're doing in your core business, you're at risk of significant disruption. So we make the investments we need to navigate these big platform changes that are on top of us right now.
Yeah, David, 9,000 engineers. What are the things you're most excited about in terms of the utilization of AI or ML in your organization?
Well, I mean, ours obviously is a business of information where pattern recognition and historical context around how markets behave, is incredibly levering for our clients, also for us. So, an enormous, investment in machine learning and AI in the context of understanding, based on history, how markets will function, and that's obviously very helpful. I think there are issues with that too. There's benefit, but there are also risks. I think one of the things you'd watch, and you think about is what all this machine-based trading infrastructure is doing is it's making speed much more important in the way markets work as opposed to capital. So the way liquidity worked in markets is it used to be driven by capital. If there was capital, that would create liquidity. Now actually speed is what creates liquidity, and there's risk to that. Particularly under times of stress, there's risk around fat fingers. There are all sorts of problems, but how you get that stuff right, how do you really understand what it ultimately does is it collapses bid-offer spread and inefficiency in markets, and it makes markets much more efficient, which should be beneficial to everybody.
Yeah. John, you talked about you've been in the world of data for 30-something years, and this whole idea of a digital Geneva Convention, and to what extent will that be driven by us as humans, and to what extent will it be driven by a fabric that puts rules in place? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and perspective.
Well, I don't think the world recognizes just how significant the data transfer really is across the world. And the notion that a country in Southeast Asia can have a certain set of policies and practices that are fundamentally different than what we think here in the United States will create some exposures for us. A good example is around AI. The people in China think very differently about AI and what they want to see done with AI technology. If you were to go to Washington, D.C., you get a slightly different view and more concern about the impact on jobs than the impact on society as a whole.
Yeah.
And so I think finding the right balance between the way one part of the world thinks about advanced technology and another is critically, critically important. But going along with that is if we're going to make this transition where technology is going to have an even more impactful presence in our lives, how do we make sure that the kids that are going to have the next generation of jobs or the generation of jobs after that are prepared? And I don't think we're doing enough in this country, quite frankly, to prepare the pipeline for the world that will exist 20 to 25 years from now.
I'm going to tee up this next question for you, Claire, to answer this past one and the next one. So if you think about it, the world we live in now is one of competition for talent, and that's really what we're talking about. We all are competing for the same talent. Any of these talented young people should clearly work for Vista first, but if in the event they don't come to our firm, they look at yours. But there's about, we call it 7.6, 7.7 billion people on the planet. There's only 19 million of us who actually know how to write code. What do we do about that? And Claire, I want to hear how you're leveraging innovative techniques for recruiting and training and retaining top quality people in what is probably one of the fiercest battles in the area that you're in, which is global payments.
It is. I mean, I would say part of it is actually related to the previous topic, which is I think we're all talking about what are some of the considerations when you think about the future of AI, and what are some of the potential dangers or job loss. I think the thing that's really powerful and interesting is what are the potential ways in the ecosystem that you can start to specialize. And if you think about our product, one of the things we have is a lot of machine learning based fraud models. And now we have a product that we've released that is really about combating fraud trained on everyone else's data. And if you think about over 60% of people have bought through Stripe in the United States and the UK, we see a lot of transactions and we can protect you as a business in a way that you never would have had access to before. And I think we should all be ready and thinking about where are the vertical specializations that we all need to interrely on a little bit more, given the lack of talent. I was thinking about John's comment. I think that the introductory data science class at Stanford had 1,000 students in it earlier this year. And one thing I worry about is, do they even want careers in data science? It's just so hot right now. But how do we attract people? It's really about the mission. And people care. Our mission is to increase the GDP of the internet, which you should pause and think about for a minute. But we really are believers in globalization. We're founded by 2 Irish immigrants, and we've built a company from the beginning that was about global infrastructure in an unsolved problem. And people, developers especially, love an unsolved problem. Only about 5% of consumer spending is online today. This is a huge opportunity, and it's because there's actually fundamental pieces of commerce, payments across borders, they're actually pretty broken still. And so I think that one exists for a meaningful reason. For me, it's about economic access, entrepreneurs around the world. 2, have a really interesting problem set for the engineers that you're looking to attract. And 3, they really care about where they work and the people that they work with. And a lot of what we do is, look, we're building developer products with developers, right? So they're like, I get to work on stuff that my friends and my people that I admire get to use. And so that's pretty compelling, but you've got to bring technical talent out as the voice of the company. Increasingly, at other companies, the developer is the decision maker. The engineer is the one who's making the business decision. I don't think everybody's made that adjustment, but we really go out and assume that's the case, and we put our engineers at the front of a lot of our decisions and our interactions with our users, and I think it's incredibly effective.
Mark, you get a chance to advise some of the largest CEOs and countries on the planet about talent and talent development. If you would, give us some perspectives as to some of the advice that you give them in terms of how they're going to win or at least compete in this talent war and developing their people.
Thanks, Robert. And obviously, that's all we are. It's a people business as well. You mentioned our 250,000 people. We don't make computers. We don't make hardware. We basically have our people and our ideas. So talent's really important. What I tell our youngest folks is you're going to enter a job that doesn't exist today with technology that hasn't been invented yet to solve a problem we don't know we have. How are you preparing for that world? And so the days of getting out of college or master's programs and stopping learning is over. We spend $500 million a year just on training our people, and that doesn't include the experiential learning and the mentoring. And so what I tell all of our clients, and we have a big business in this, as you said, but for us too, it's a continual learning process. So we have something we just started called badging. Of our 250,000 people, 75% are millennials. They want to move really quickly up to my role. Very tough. We can't have everybody do that. I have 4 kids. One's in the audience, so they want to move up too. So what we started was this thing called badging, which is just incredible, where we give people the opportunity to take classes outside of EY, take our courses in EY, sign up for projects. You get these badges. You can put them on your social media. They're validated by an external firm. And then you are credentialized, both externally and internally, and your personal brand is built. That's why they want to come to us. We have 1 million alumni, and our proposition is whenever you come, however long you stay, it's an exceptional experience that will last a lifetime. They won't stay with us. So we're training people to go out and be CSOs, CFOs, and things like that. So that's the kind of advice I'd give to our clients, which is continual learning. Don't be afraid to lose your people. If people are coming after them, it means you're doing a good job.
You guys have an innovative way of reskilling people to reintroduce them back into the workforce. I'd love to hear about that. Then I'm going to switch to David for a second to talk about what they're doing at Goldman. Mark?
Yeah. So to reskill our people?
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, we have lots of ways we do it. Obviously, we work with our people to develop not only their finance skills, but what we do is we team them up with other people from around the world. And for us, the days of being an individualist are over. Nobody can answer the questions that they have to answer today by themselves. So what we try and do is the experiential learning is the biggest and most important part of what we do. It's not the classroom learning. It's not even the way they teach. But when you're involved in different types of assignments out of your comfort zone, then you're growing. Then you're experiencing. And we push people that direction. We try and get them to move across our businesses and work outside of the major. What I say to them is your degree enables you. It doesn't define you. And so don't think narrowly, think broadly.
Yeah, so 20 plus years ago, Bill Gates talked about his biggest competition for talent was Goldman Sachs. Today, David, you have a different, the script is somewhat flipped, right? I mean, a lot of the talent you were looking for 20 years ago are now thinking to the left coast or thinking about technology. How are you recruiting and training, and how are you actually building an infrastructure that makes Goldman an attractive place for some of the most talented people on the planet to now work?
Well, the world's changed a lot from 20, 30 years ago. People got out of school. They went into narrow silos. Mark made the comment, they stayed or they got a graduate education and they were then done. Obviously, that's upside down. And I'd say, for us, a lot of the things Mark mentioned are the same. We're a professional services firm. Our business, we don't manufacture things. We have people who provide services. They have to be, hugely motivated, intelligent, engaged, people. One of the things that's really important for us is we keep that virtuous cycle going. It is still, and we feel lucky, we don't take this for granted, it is still very easy for us to recruit great people out of school. We might compete with different forces. I think that evolves and that changes, but we can continue, and we hire about 2,000 people out of school a year, to hire great people out of school. One of the great things, and Mark echoed this, is people get experience in our organization and they go do other things. That's a virtue. We need to keep a percentage of them that want to build their careers in our business. And we think about a lot of the same things in doing that. You've got to constantly invest in them. You have to train them. You have to give them ongoing education. You have to give them a great, both economic proposal over time, but also a social proposal over time. And they want to work in an environment that's stimulating, that's entrepreneurial, that's innovative. And we spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Right.
I think back to when I started 35 years ago in the business, and I look at the business now, it's changed enormously. But one of the things that hasn't changed is the business allows people to solve problems, use great resources to do that, and be surrounded by really, really smart, motivated people. And as long as we keep that all working, in the same way, it should continue to be a virtuous cycle. But we don't take it for granted, and we spend an enormous amount of time on it. Workforce has to be much more diverse. That's a hugely important part of it.
Right.
We're focused on that, so hopefully we get that stuff right over time.
So, David, a few years ago, you all announced initiatives where your analysts would have to leave by Friday at a certain time and couldn't work the weekend. Tell us a little bit about the effect of that program, and is that something that you would encourage other financial institutions to embrace?
Well, I'd encourage all institutions to embrace the fact that we've all got to be more flexible in the way we do things. And to just make it a simple kind of analogy, when I think back to 35 years ago when I started, you're in a professional services business. When you left the office, you left. No one could get in touch with you. And there was a separation on a day-to-day basis. As the world's evolved, everybody's connected 24/7. Clients, want to be connected. People want to be responsive to clients. Young people come out of school. They are not equipped to balance that the same way somebody could balance that if they're in their 40s, they're in their 50s, they have a lot of experience. And so we felt it was very, very important to do a better job setting expectations for our people as to what was expected to them and making sure they understood that work was very, very important, but having a balanced, well-rounded life, being happy, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. They needed help, and so we set up a bunch of parameters to do that. And it's helped our employee ecosystem, that we were talking about a few minutes ago, and it's important stuff. But you've got to be flexible, and you've got to be willing to change. And when we did that, people said, you can't do that, and we said, yes, you can.
Yeah. Devin, since you took over the stewardship at eBay, you've almost tripled the size of the users and the buyers and the sellers. And I want to talk a bit about how you have encouraged your organization to manage through this rapid growth and leveraging, I'll call it a diverse workforce, 4 sets of initiatives that you've spoken about publicly.
Yeah, just before I get that, I thought something I'm passionate about, we were talking about how do you create a pool of talent. And I think that it's a national embarrassment that we don't have mandatory K through 12 computer science education. There are 10 times as many lower schools.
I agree with that.
Go ahead. There are 10 times as many lower schools that are teaching handwriting as there are basic computer skills.
Right.
And the point is not to create 300 million engineers. The point is there is no business or industry that is not a technology business. And we're staring at the problem and we're not doing anything about it. To the point of my own organization, I think what I notice in the technology industry is that purpose and impact trump things. They eat things like compensation for breakfast. How do you keep and retain great people? They really do care about the mission. They really do, particularly millennials who are coming out of school. They have tons of choices. They really care what their organization does. They really care that their organization makes a positive impact on the world. And then when they view their job, they really care that they get to build something that millions of people are going to see. They really want to do something meaningful. And for me, obviously things like your job, your title, your money matter, but they don't matter as much as the true purpose, not corporate speak, of what your organization does, and the true role and the impact that you can have. And for me, as we've grown the organization and we've grown our workforce, how does a 21-year-old internet company get some of the brightest talent in the world? Purpose and impact, all day long.
I want to actually go a little deeper, frankly, Devin, on this whole idea of onboarding and on-ramping our citizenry. We've got, many of you may or may not know, at my firm, we conduct these call it capability or aptitude tests, and about 8.8% of the population get an A on this test, and about another 14% get a B. And as I tell people, there have more people in China who get A's on this test than we have people. right? And so when you start to think about onboarding all of our citizenry, what are the ideas that we should actually think about and talk about today to get our people to be more frankly, enabled to participate in this global economy? John, I know you and I have talked a bit about it. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and solutions around this. And then anyone else on the panel, please jump in.
Well, I think the most important thing, particularly for the engineering community at large, is to have projects that they can get excited about, where they can really, really go deep. And that's why some of the more global firms are dibble-dabbling in almost anything and everything related to new and advanced technology, because that's what attracts and retains these bright young engineers to be a part of that. In addition to that, you have to have a set of social practices around the business that are all-inclusive. And so this notion of inclusiveness in tech has become very, very important, to the point where we want to make sure that you can sit next door to someone who has similar interest as you, but is very different than you, and yet have a team approach that really does yield the right outcome. So the combination of learning about the technology and doing things that are exciting and creating an ecosystem within the company where people can share and collaborate, that becomes critically important to long-term success.
Right. Mark?
Yeah, I think Claire said this earlier, that there are technology companies up here, obviously, but most of the people won't be technologists.
Right.
There'll be people who use technology. So getting them introduced to what technology can do for you, not being afraid of it, and if you're not a coder, you can still use data and digital, and you have to understand cyber and all those big issues, is incredibly important. But I go back also to what Devin said. I mean, I think when I look at the millennials we hire 65,000 people, we had 2 million applicants. They all ask about our purpose. They all ask, what are you doing besides making money?
Right.
And what's my flexibility? Now, we did a polling of all our young people. We have a great data set, and they don't care as much about their compensation or their title as they do having a flexible work arrangement where they can go home and do things or take care of parents or do other things. We have to change the way we work if we want to get these great people. We can't just keep doing it the old way, and that's really, you're seeing it evolve in different places around the world quite differently.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's two things that I think a lot about. One is, are we putting tools in the hands of people that we should be just taking more risks on them teaching themselves and learning? And I worry a lot about the fact that the technical talent is very isolated to certain cities or certain locations in the world, Seattle, the Bay Area. Can we do more? Think of one idea we talk about at Stripe is like a CrossFit for entrepreneurs, where it's really about literacy on what tools might make sense for you to build your business and how we can work more, I think, with policy institutions, with governments to make that available. The other is just fundamentally taking more risks on talent. And one thing we've done is we do a lot of, as people apply to the company, letting them take some tests about their capabilities and their coding skills. And we got candidates from schools, for example, for our internships that we never would have gone to that school and talked to them. But they just showed great talent in problem solving. And the other kind of risk is someone like me. I'm an English major. And you know what English major, you know what liberal arts teaches you? It teaches you how to consume and synthesize tons of information and make articulate arguments in writing and in speech. And I think that I worry sometimes we might overcorrect from some core skills, because what is technology really? What did I learn at Google and now I learned? It's like an information system map, right? And I think that we have to be smarter about who we let lead.
Right.
And sometimes I think we're limiting ourselves too much, both on the reach of the people interacting with technology from an early age, as Devin said, but also on the types of skills that we value and how they help us lead into the future.
Speaking about smarter about who we let lead, David, let's talk a little bit about the Goldman Sachs returnship program. I mean, Goldman, my experience there was one that, you had very capable, smart people thinking about systems that scale, typically for Goldman. When I think about this returnship program, you guys have been at it 10 years now. It seems like it's very successful. How do you think about scaling that beyond Goldman's walls? How should we as executives think about those sort of programs to, frankly, again, enable our citizenry to really participate in this great economic expansion opportunity?
So thanks, Robert. And just so people know, the returnship program is a program we initiated about 10 years ago to allow women that had worked in the industry and had off-ramp for a period of time to create a process to bring them back, back into the business. It's been hugely successful. I think it's a great example of the kind of thing that needs to be done to just think more flexibly about talent, and it's come up in a variety of ways in the conversation. I think what Claire just said about taking a risk on people, when you think about returnship, there are all sorts of excuses and all sorts of reasons when you're bringing somebody, back in to not take risk. I think taking risk is extremely important when you talk about diversity. It's extremely important to accelerate careers and put people in positions. You know what? They might stumble, they might fail, but you're going to do better by basically accelerating careers. And so we look for ways, as we think about these issues, to do things that shift the paradigm or create creative ways to do different things, because we're an organization that just needs people, needs smart, motivated people that want to come in and out of the organization. I think one of the themes that's here is you just have to be more flexible. You have to be more flexible in where people want to live, how people want to work, how they want to spend their time. Ours 35 years ago was an incredibly rigid business, and candidly, most of the businesses that in one way, shape, or form are represented here, if you go back 30 years ago, were incredibly rigid. We have to be open to doing things differently and to really accommodate our people's lives in a much more flexible way.
Yeah, David, I always think about how we do this at scale. You think about the reskilling of America, the reskilling of the workforce. How do you now take those sort of programs and drive them outside of the walls of Goldman? I think we as executives have that responsibility to actually take that leadership beyond our existing walls that we call our company. So I'd love to hear more thoughts about how you can think about scaling some of those and any others.
Yeah, look, in terms of returnship, it's actually not a question of reskilling people. These are highly skilled people that took a break. It's creating opportunities, for them. I think that's a very scalable program broadly for businesses. People should not, to be successful and have long dated careers, have to be on track. Right. The world should allow people to be on track, off track, on track, and there's great talent that doesn't work in a straight line. I think that's very scalable. In terms of training and skill, by the way, I love what Devin said just about how we educate and how important it is to think about different skill set. We've all got to find ways to create leverage to give people the kind of skills that work in organizations. I too am a liberal arts person. I'm a big advocate for the liberal arts, how it helps you think, how it develops leaders. But all this stuff, I think, requires a change in mindset from the traditional way that we've done it. And I know I'm not giving you, a specific answer, but it's getting business leaders like this to be willing to do things differently, think about things differently, and take a little risk. We need to take risk as business leaders, more risk than normally we'd take.
Agree. I'm going to switch to a new topic and then give some time for questions. And Devin, I want to talk one thing about you. You've done a great job building trust between buyers and sellers in a fabric that is the internet. One of the things that John talked about was, how we are going to deal with the protection of security and privacy. Love to hear how you think about and how you drive your organization forward in their thinking about preserving trust in an engaged environment where, frankly, data and information is flying across our platforms at light speed.
Yeah, I completely echo John's comments. I think the foundation of the digital economy is not servers and networks, it's trust. And if you think about all of the incredible companies that have sprung up in the last 15 years, not a single one of them would work without trust. Consumer trust, corporate trust. It is the currency that makes the digital economy work. And we're at a pivotal moment right now. And I think it is an enormous mistake for companies to not recognize the moment that we're in. And for them to resist this and to be forced kicking and screaming into regulation is not good for society, and it's certainly not good for their shareholders. I think that it's incredibly important now that there is a public-private partnership that brings transparency to people about how data is used, that brings security to people about how their data is protected, and I think for us, we're somewhat fortunate that our business model is a little bit different than what's in the spotlight, but that doesn't make any of those issues less relevant.
Yeah, Mark, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as you are on that fulcrum often between public and private institutions and organizations, and how companies and executives and our policymakers should think about that trust and how to preserve it, but yet not inhibit the growth of the opportunity that we all are benefiting from?
It's the pivotal question, Robert. You asked about it with how do we engage with education, and the same question now about how do we engage with government. I would tell you that I think the answer is engagement. And to your point, Devin, not putting your head in the sand like an ostrich and saying this isn't going to happen. I chair a group in Russia with the Prime Minister Medvedev with 50 different businesses who invest in Russia. And we could say we shouldn't be engaging with Russia today. But you know what? If we didn't, it would get worse, not better. Business has to be a bridge. We don't have a boundary that's a country. I was one of those 15 CEOs who sat on Donald Trump's CEO advisory board that we disbanded ourselves. I believe I'd rather be in the room negotiating, presenting our strong point of view and our culture from around the world than outside complaining. Right. We have to engage with business. I think it's dialogue. I think it's demonstration. And frankly, it's leadership. And so I would agree that we can't put our head in the sand. And I think that it's a part of it's a CEO's role as a leader to recognize, again, not just quarter to quarter, we talked about short-termism, but to talk about what will affect our humankind down the road, year, 5, 7, 10 years from now. And government's going to be a big actor in that. We need to work together.
Yeah, John, you have spent your life as a CEO and now this part of your life as a chairman thinking about and advising CEOs on how to take that leadership mantle. What are the words that you share with them in terms of what is their responsibility in effect of managing data privacy, and frankly engaging consciously in our dynamic?
I think one of the most important things for any CEO is to, as I jokingly say, use mouth and ears proportionately. Do a lot more listening than talking. And that process allows you to assimilate more and more insights from the employee base, the customer base, the partner base. The more you listen, the more you can come back with ideas that can be impactful or influential to the company or organization overall. So I am very much from the school that leadership is first about listening, and then using that insight to then translate it into something that can be done, if you will, done in a meaningful way. The more often you do that, quite frankly, the better outcome you have for your business.
I think let's get ready for a few questions from the audience, but before we get there, Claire, you are now part of a wonderful organization that has a chance to participate on the early stages of growth. And you've talked a bit about how you look for people, attract, retain, and develop. How will you drive what I'll call leadership into your culture about engaging in these ecosystems? I know you talked about the technical aspects of building APIs to connect, but what about the ethical responsibilities of protection of data?
I think that as everyone was talking, one thing came to my mind that I think we have to watch out for, which is if bigger companies are the only ones who can somehow become trusted or be able to handle the regulatory scheme, we're actually going to stifle innovation, right? So we have to think of a way that there can be leadership and there can be exchange of ideas. But I mean, one of Stripe's fundamental innovations early on was just tokenize. So basically encrypt the credit card. So you're never passing the credit card data. So then you don't have the personal information. Like, you have to think about more solutions like that we could all share so that you could build trust in the ecosystem, not in one or two companies or government regulatory schemes. I think at Stripe, a lot of the core innovation of the company was, there must be a better way to do the thing that's been built historically in terms of payments, and that was built very locally. Payments tends to be very local to certain countries or governments, and you have to think quite differently to build the technology layer that enables it. And so it's very core in the founding of the company, and what we've done as we've grown quite quickly is developed what I call sort of founding documents. And I think every great company needs to have these. Every great organization, you could be a nonprofit, which is, why do you exist? What are your operating principles or your values? What are your long-term goals? Where's the meaning in the work that you're doing? But not just talk about them, actually document them. And in our onboarding process, not only do the founders do a session on the vision for the company, but I also do a session on how does the sort of center of the culture hold as we grow and scale quickly. One of my favorite quotes is from David Packard of Hewlett-Packard, which is, most companies dive into indigestion, not starvation. Right. And I think if you don't know your fundamental framework in which you're trying to live and effect change, you will start to lose focus.
Well-
and
well
for us, it's about staying focused.
Well said. Let's talk for one more second before we go to questions. So hopefully we have the mics ready. Trust and transparency go hand in hand. And one of the new fabrics of technology is something we call blockchain. It has the ability to provide massive amounts of transparency and to some degree, some thoughts around how we're going to manage the trust and engagement in transactions. David, I know at Goldman you all are starting to evaluate and think about various blockchain technologies, and I think you're starting to make investments in Bitcoin and some of the other componentry around cyber or cryptocurrency. You want to spend a few minutes or a few seconds just talking a little bit about how Goldman Sachs is thinking about those two dynamics?
Sure. I mean, blockchain is very, very interesting technology. It's going to create lots of change and disruption around business. We're obviously focused on it, making investments and understanding it or applying it, to processes as lots of other people are. We're not making investments in Bitcoin, although there's like cryptocurrency is a very, very different discussion. And while we have some very, very sophisticated clients that we spend time talking to, kind of thinking about, the whole cryptocurrency world, I'll put that aside as something that we're, interested in, but with great, great caution. Look, the issue of trust obviously, comes to the discussion around these technologies. I think the issue is less about that and more about, how those technologies can really simplify and take friction out of processes.
Okay.
And the opportunity set for that is enormous. And Claire and her company are doing some very, very cool things around that. But there's an enormous amount of friction. I mean, it's think about Goldman Sachs moving money from Goldman Sachs in the U.S. to Goldman Sachs in London, and the steps that have to occur both inside Goldman Sachs and outside Goldman Sachs for that to happen. And that is just in a simple way some of the magic of what these technologies can ultimately do, magnified across thousands and thousands and thousands of companies, millions and millions of companies, transactions, et cetera. There's a lot of economic opportunity in all that. Right. And I think it's a space where you'll see continued investment.
Yep. Mark, any other comments on how you think about blockchain?
I think David said it well. It will transform the way we think and do business. It is a distributive ledger where you won't need a central source, and it's going to increase. It will increase trust, though, in the transactions, and you can follow real time through the supply chain things, and everyone will have line of sight. There'll be an automatic record. There's a lot to figure out yet. It's a lot of energy it takes. You got to be very trusting to put all your information onto one system you're going to share. So it's years away, I think, until it's fully adopted, but it will be transformational.
I have time for, I think, one question. Any questions in the audience? If not, we're going to go to, right here. If not, we're going to go to the lightning round. There we go.
A lot was mentioned about education and learning while on the job. How does that influence or change the effect of getting a master's or an MBA or something like that?
I get that question a lot from our folks. Listen, I think if you want to, we did, interestingly, in the UK firm, we started to hire people with not typical credentials, people who didn't have the degrees that we needed in the past. We went through the tests that you talked about, Robert, that we had, went through an interview process. By and low, at the end of the process, 25% of the people we hired would never have gotten in with the credentials that we originally were looking for. And they're our top performers. So I'm a big believer in education. I think you can get that. I believe in experiential education, so I think you learn as much, if not more, on the job than in school. That being said, some of our best teachers still sit in universities, and so I think you can do both. I'm not sure it's an either or, but I honestly believe that over time, the place you will learn the most to be successful in your education will be with your employer, working on real live projects every day.
Yep. Great. Really quickly, lightning round. You want to address that?
I was just going to say, there's also got to be a value proposition. I mean, one of the things that's happened with graduate degrees when you compare on-the-job experience, versus not, there's not necessarily the right value equation. And what are you giving up economically? What is it costing economically? And what's the payback? And so there's a lot of.
For my son in the audience, you still need a degree.
Which gets to the last question. What advice would you give a 21 or 22-year-old today? Devin, start with you.
Take computer programming, explore a lot, don't have a career plan. I've never known a single person that's had one that's worked out that way.
All right, John.
Follow your instinct. Pursue the things that are of a passion for you, as opposed to something that someone else recommends that you do.
Okay, Mark.
Enjoy the journey. Don't wait for the destination. And your seat at the dinner table is every bit as important as your seat at the conference room table.
All right, Claire.
go where the growth is.
Great. David.
There are a bunch that are said. There's one that's a little bit out there that I'd say to a 20-year-old that's different than take computer program, which is, I think, important. Take accounting. Because no matter what you do in the world, no matter what you do in the world, understanding as a basis that is really, really relevant, and then pursue your passion and enjoy life. It's a wonderful, wonderful marathon, not a sprint.
Great. I want to thank this distinguished group of panelists. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Well done, my friend.